It's called Cisvel.
Yeah, I picked them as an example.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they've already paid for, whoever the vendor is, they've already paid for these patents to use them, and that price gets put on at the price of the device. So something that could be sold to the consumer quite profitably at, say, £40, and now becomes £60 or £70 because they've got to get the money back for the patents, the rights to the patents.
Yeah.
So everything just adds on to the price, basically, and makes it much more expensive than it needs to be, all because people own ideas. That's what it amounts to, is people own ideas.
You have to define also what they own. In general, that goes into the discussion about patents in general. But if you're talking about, buying an MP3 player, I mean, should we pay the person who invented plastic? Should we also pay the person who invented some function in mathematics because they used it for wavelets or something, even in MPEG, or to just create certain functions? Should we pay the mathematicians who lived back in the 1700s? Should we pay their family members? Maybe we should pay their ancestors as well. People whose grandfather created some function, because they obviously innovated this thing, without which the one MP3 player that can actually compress your files. So the question is, but they try to conveniently put the barrier in some, they usually say 20 years, but it doesn't have to be 20 years. And they define what's patentable, what's not patentable. And they want to take all the so-called royalties to ensure it's not a commodity, to ensure the device is not going to be something that's sold at the price of production, but is actually paying somebody to push papers around, or to
the argument is basically, we are the only ones who are allowed to innovate. No one else is allowed to innovate, and anyone else who does has to pay us because we own the ideas.
I just want to mention something very quickly about MPEG-LA. It's no longer just about MPEG. It's a very confusing name, but now they also create the so-called pools. It sounds very soothing, pool. It's more like an extortion racket, and they actually put it on things like biology now, and it's really fascinating. If you go to their website, you see that they found it extremely profitable to make money out of everyone's video, almost every person's video in some way, and charging just about any company that sells you something that plays video or MPEG or something. They have to pay royalties to this company, extremely profitable. They try to move into biology and all kinds of things now, and this is the sick culture of creating monopolies using what's called, basically a patent monopoly. And of course you have all kinds of people walking around, and I know it's controversial to say that, but even people like Bill Gates, they promote this notion of monopolizing everything, even seeds. Even when you grow a plant, and this plant produces seeds, for its ancestors, you have to pay a company called Monsanto in the United States for your own, you pay for the plant, and when the plant makes seeds, you owe them company for this seed. You see what they do here? They actually own life. So when you want to produce food, you have to pay them. And these are the sorts of companies which make a lot of money doing nothing. Just basically say, we invented this seed. Of course, it was actually created by nature and by the reproduction, but I
remember a while back with Monsanto, one of the things they did was around GM crops, and GM crops are banned from the food chain in Europe and the EU. Well, for now, I know they're desperately trying to lobby to get that removed.
It's exceptionally useful here, because it shows you how the governments actually play a role in trying to help these companies. They use them as
what Monsanto would do is they would be American company, Monsanto, an American company. They would graciously donate grain and all that to very poor African nations, and give them free grain, all courtesy of Monsanto, because they're the good guys. They really are.
Yeah.
The problem is when the African farmers then take that grain and plant it. It means that nothing that grows on that soil, I mean, they got one, say they got 1 year's worth of crop from this Monsanto seed. It's genetically modified. They can't sell it in Europe. The only market they've got that will take it is America, where Monsanto can then basically control the price. They'll buy it for cheap. They won't pay very good prices, because, well, where else can you sell it? You either take our prices or you don't sell it at all. And then the year after that, they decide the farmers decide, you know what, we got screwed over by Monsanto last year. We'll switch to regular crops this year so that we've got a choice. We can sell it to the EU, we can sell it to Australia, to China, to wherever. The problem is that the land is now polluted with GM, and that's against the rules. Anything that's grown there in that land, even although there's no GM seeds, it's natural seeds, because the actual land is then polluted with GM, it's still banned. Their crop is still banned from the EU. So they have no choice, again, but to keep selling it to the Americans.
Well, moving on to our next topic. Roy, have you got any other stories for us before I shift focus onto Gordon and I think a story that he wants to bring up?
We have all sorts of things about patents now. That's one of my areas of interest because I think that's the most important issue we have to deal with. Microsoft hasn't sued any company in a while. That's quite good news. One of the did you hear anything about the attempt by Microsoft to change policies and to actually use its own people to change the laws? They also hired a person. Well, they occasionally hire people who used to work for companies that are pro-patents, and they try to get them as lobbyists for more patents, software patents, and so on. And the Gates Foundation also plays a role in it. And I know it sounds like a very sidle thing and not really the main issue, especially for this show. But the Gates Foundation actually plays a big, big role in all sorts of things which kind of concern me. We talked about it, I think, in the previous show. But it's not the only one that's doing that. Since we mentioned Africa before, there is this thing called the Green Revolution. It's also been backed by Rockefeller, the Rockefeller Foundation. It's supposed to revere these things because they're called foundations. But what they do is they also try to enrich their friends, their extremely rich friends in New Jersey, in Monsanto, by helping them out by seeding the market, and they seed the market literally. They usually talk about seeding the market, making people actually dependent on your product, but in this case, they actually use seeds to do that, and that really troubles me, especially if you've seen what happens in India with Monsanto seeds. Since we brought up the subject, I might as well mention many of them commit suicide, and the way they commit suicide is a very clever way. Is they use the pesticides from Monsanto to protest, to actually make their death an actual protest against the company. So they use the pesticides, they drink them to their, to actually, because just to give some context, what the company is doing, Monsanto, is they rely on farmers who take some debt to plant their seeds, and when things don't work out, they still have the debt mostly to Monsanto for the seeds they had to buy, because they buy the seeds instead of growing or using the seeds that come off the ground. Usually there is this cycle where you use a certain amount of seeds to plant in the next season, and the rest you basically sell as food. And now the way it works, and Monsanto is trying to always have like the authorized seeds, everything in actual coming in bags of seeds, and this is like the only authorized thing you can plant. And everything else is going to be like polluted or illegal, illegal seeds. Can you imagine that? You've got seeds, you say, oh, it's illegal. You have to license them from this big company in America, and then comes the person who's like the rich uncle from America, and he says, oh, I'm donating you seeds, to feed all the people. And that's the way it's presented. We feed I think the slogan is something like feeding the world's hungry, or feeding the world's poor, and some of the aristocrats and the charlatans actually play along with it, and they pretend that they are the gift givers. They're the people who go to these companies like these countries like India and Africa, and they make a lot of fuss about how they kind of donate food to these companies because there is hunger. So it's quite a
I believe Gordon has got a story that he wants to bring up from Torrent Freak. Is that correct, Gordon?
Yeah, this one, it never fails to amaze me just how low the music business mafia are, the RIAA and the MIMPAA. In this case, it wasn't actually them, although I could quite believe it was them. Apparently, they've been using the same tactics as it's not them. It's got to stress this. That's a fake MPA and RIA. It's not the real ones. But what they do is it's malware, and it's affecting Windows malware, which the BBC don't seem to know the difference